There we go. All right, welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Tommy Ferguson. I'm the Executive Director of Capital City Village. All of the folks here with us today, but those who might be watching from home, if you don't know more about Capital City Village, we are a local nonprofit that focuses on helping seniors age well in their own homes and to be able to do that for as long as possible. And we do that through a blend of volunteer services as well as programs, engaging programs like the one today, as well as some informational as well as social programs to keep people really connected and informed. So we are happy to bring a writer series to our group here in Austin. And we've had several writers from, locally as well as elsewhere. And we're very pleased to bring Scott Blackwood with us today. So again, thank you for joining us and giving us some of your time. If you would like to learn more about Capital City Village, I do encourage you to visit our website, capitalcityvillage.org. You can see a lot of events and activities coming up, as well as opportunities to become involved as a volunteer, as well as a member. So if you or someone you know might be interested to learn more, I encourage you to visit our website. Again, we are actively combating social isolation among the Austin population of seniors, and we do that through programs like this, as well as the direct services that we provide through our trusted volunteers. So it is my immense pleasure. I wanted to let you know today that we have Scott Blackwood with us. He is an award-winning novelist. He will talk a little bit about his novel, specifically See How Small, with characters and events inspired by the yogurt shop murders of Austin in 1991. Blackwood will discuss how the horrific events of 30 years ago tomorrow, left an indelible impression on him as a young father and high school teacher, and how he reimagined those events in his fictional telling of how a community grapples with grief and loss. Scott teaches creative writing at Hollins University. He is the author of 5 books, including 2 novels, a story collection, and 2 narrative nonfiction works, The Rise and Fall of Paramount Records, released by Jack White of Third Man Records, as a part of a Grammy-winning collection of Delta blues and race records from 1917 to 1932. Scott received his MFA from Texas State University. He divides his time between Roanoke, Virginia, and Austin, Texas. And for full disclosure, I want to let you all know that I am Scott's spouse. So a little bit of using opportunity to get this writer here today, but all kidding aside, I think the work was really amazing, and I'm just really excited for him to have an opportunity to talk with you a bit more about the research and writing of this book specifically, but also some of his other novels and activity. I did want to, just as a way of introducing most of what we're talking about today, just read a little bit about the event that inspired the novel. Tomorrow, as I mentioned, is the 30th anniversary of the yogurt shop murders here in Austin. And this is just a small piece from the Austin American Statesman, something that was pulled out in, I think, also network on USA Today as well. It has been 30 years since firefighters doused the flames tearing through a North Austin yogurt shop and discovered the bodies of 4 teenage girls who had been bound, gagged, and shot in the head. The horrific crime shocked the city, unsettled investigators, and devastated the teens' families. More than 1,000 people attended a church service for the girls. A candlelight vigil drew more mourners 6 months later, and as days turned into weeks, then months without an arrest. Evidence destroyed by the fire and washed away by the fire hoses was hard to come by, and rewards for the information grew. And then it goes on to talk about how, after so many years, the leads and the information tying back to the original crime are very thin, and it still remains unsolved today. So again, I wanted to focus a little bit on Scott, his research and writing of the book. So I'm going to introduce him right now and let him just tell us a little bit more about himself. And again, for those folks watching at home or live streaming this and watching this later, you can tell us a little bit more about how your interest in this developed. But thank you for giving us your time. I'm upstairs, he's downstairs, and so we're splitting our our household today to make this event possible. So Scott, please go right ahead and tell us a little bit more.
Hi, everybody. I'm glad to be here. Yeah, so I was teaching high school in 1991 when the Yoga Truck murders happened, and I had a young daughter who was 3 months old at the time. And so, you know, we were waking up at odd hours, and Ellie, who some of you may have known, but, you know, waking up at odd hours, and I was totally out of it. So I went in to my class, and everyone's talking about the Ergoshop murders. And, you know, and rumor and conjecture were just flying, you know, like there was pentagram on the wall and all this stuff. And, but people were crying, and that caught my attention. And, you know, it was 4 girls summarily executed, and just horrific. And I come into this, you know, out of the blue, and they're just telling me this randomly at different points. And it, you know, having had a daughter 3 months prior to that, I was very disturbed by it, you know, and of course the DNA was washed away, and, you know, I think in 2009, they released, it's kind of a Greek tragedy overall, because the boys that were the same age and could not have put this together in any way. You know, they were not capable of this. And frankly, you know, Robert Springsteen and a couple of other guys were not the quickest wits. You know, they were not advanced people in the, you know, in their high schools, or, you know, but, you know, it didn't matter, because the police, you know, at one point they put a gun to the back of their head, and you know, that turned up on video, and you know, just, and I had the transcripts of the interrogations, and from Jordan Smith, who'd sent me the transcripts. She used to cover the Austin Chronicle, and she followed these murders for years and years. And she told me, you know, there's no way that these guys committed this. And it's just, it's convenient for the cops to put this on them at this time, you know, when, you know, justice prevails. But there was no way. It was just a pure Greek tragedy all the way around. And yeah, and I, you know, went in that day, and just all chaos broke loose in the classroom. And, you know, and later, you know, there were invasions of homes on the east side, you know, for various reasons, because of goths and, you know, people, you know, dressed in black, and that kind of reasoning. It made no sense whatever. You know, they were just invading houses to produce some kind of nefarious, you know, east side, you know, crime, and it made no sense.
And Scott, do you think, I mean, this was all part of sort of maybe the desperation to find some lead, some perpetrator to pin it on, the pressure probably from the families in the community to find somebody and make justice happen, and some sort of pressure again that to just really grasp at these, really not really particularly valid leads, and really, like you mentioned, the suspects themselves were probably, nowhere close to being valid as well.
No. And they found some people in Mexico City as well during that time, and arrested them. But it came out later that they were tortured to confess. And it just built upon itself, and became this horrific incident that carried through many lives, and haunted many people for many years. And but like I said, it was a great tragedy. And then Robert Springsteen was in jail and on death row for 10 years. 10 years, So, and I actually heard from his father in the writing of this book, where he emailed me and was like, "What is this book about?" And I was like, "Well, it's a fictional account of this." And I rearranged everything, of course, in it. It's really about grief and what grief does to people. So over time, and I interviewed Dave DeVoe, one of the I had a friend in the fire department, and he got Dave DeVoe to call me, and he was the one who discovered the girls in the fire. And it was so much going on in 1991. There were all these basically fires that were set to recover the insurance funds, and he never expected to find anyone in there. And he told me, he was absolutely shocked to see a bright bare foot sticking up through the water. And, that stayed with him forever. And he ended up moving to Washington State about 10 years ago. And he never got rid of the images that he saw that night. So, had a profound effect on many people.
And Scott, if you could elaborate a little bit too, I mean, again, having known what you were looking at when you were going through the research for the book, but you talked with, different people, including the firefighter that actually discovered the girls. And that, if you want to elaborate too, sort of morphed into one of the characters that actually develops in the book, as well as, you had numerous interactions with Jordan Smith, who was the Austin Chronicle's reporter who covered this for, well, now going on decades, really, and had, just volumes and volumes of information that she had compiled in her research. And I remember when I was working at the Austin Chronicle in the late 90s, so again, not quite 10 years after this had happened, a couple of the journalists came and we were talking about it, just, water cooler talk, and talking about that the people that they had apprehended were not the people that did it. There was just the impossibility of it then was clear to the people who had done the real research of it. So yeah, if you could talk about how that research developed into the material and the characters and the arc of what actually transpires in the novel.
Yeah, I changed the location of the place. It's basically on Barton Springs, and I changed virtually everything about the book in relation to the experience of even set it in the early 2000s, but it was one of the things that Jordan convinced me of early on was that these guys did not do it. And she sent, the transcripts of the interrogations, which were just mind-boggling. Like, how could someone confess to this? And they just came up. The cops came up with imaginative moments where the interrogators or the interrogate the people being interrogated just climbed onto those and wrote it all the way. And they admitted to, shooting and all this stuff, but there was extra pressure on them to conform. And they said, the cops were saying, there's no way you're going to get out of here unless you confess. And so, this went on, and I have the transcripts of those interviews, and Jordan had sent them to me. And it's just horrific. I mean, in one case, it's a 6-hour interrogation, and another, it's a 2-hour interrogation. So, it's just, the pressure on these guys, again, who weren't the brightest souls in the universe, was intense, very intense.
Well, and I think we've also, I know that at least in the last decade or so, I've read numerous accounts of people with coerced confessions, and that had been a tactic, and certainly came into play with these folks that were, really just completely pressured and dominated by the police investigators, because, it sounds like they were fairly desperate to produce some result, and that these young teenage guys were really just completely out of their depth and overwhelmed, and it was a false confession. It was, coerced, and that we've seen now that there's been, that really was more of the norm for a long time, was that kind of interrogation tactic.
Yeah. And it wasn't until 2009 that a combination of DNA proved that Robert Springsteen and his co-conspirator were not the people that they thought they were. And it was around that time that Jordan contacted me and said, this is a very convoluted DNA sample, and we got it from the girls, and it's it's potentially exculpatory for the boys, and that's how they got released. And there's been no leads. They had 5,000 leads originally in this, and again, my book See All Small is about sorting through the guilt and the extraneous things that pressure the characters. It's not about solving the crime. So that's really what it is.
Well, I want to give a chance for you to read an excerpt or two from the book, but also to, I know, because it sounds, somewhat unrelated. Here you were, a young father and high school teacher in Austin at the time. And certainly I think anybody that remembers when this happened, had some sort of impact and some, quite deeply. But, interesting that you would pick this topic, and you were drawn to something that created such community grief, and how people, deal with that, and how do you go on and what happens afterwards. And so wondering if you could tell a little bit about how you sort of were, what drew you to actually write about this, even in a fictionalized, inspired version, but really what drew you to a story like this in order to, and to create a novel around it.
Yeah, it's been, for years and years, the parents would come out and be present on the 6th and, give, they were looking for leads, saying, for maybe the first 10 years, I remember it specifically, probably until 2001 or so. And they would go on the news channels and really push this idea of justice, and justice for their daughters. And it stuck with me over the years, and especially having children, they were girls, and it just worried me, and stuck with me a long time. And by the time I got in touch with Jordan, all the accountability had lifted, and so there was no actual crime committed that we had any entanglements with anymore. And so it haunted me. So I stuck with it, and various incarnations, and of course Tommy read many of these incarnations over time, over 5 or 6 years. Yeah. And I just wanted to get it right and have a kind of a some kind of lifting of the pressure off these characters, that they need to have some kind of catharsis ultimately. And I think I achieved that in the book. It's convoluted, but it's all about catharsis in some ways, and the lifting of the pressure. And
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, I think had become, for so long, everybody, certainly in the community, but the people closest to it were really just struggling to figure out something like what, some, I don't know, some closure, some resolution, if never justice. And I think most of us who were around in Austin at that time will remember those just really sad billboards that were on display for a very long time. Who killed these girls? And it was something. Yeah, right along I-35, there were these huge billboards, and just really trying to find any lead, but also serving as a constant reminder of what had happened. And in that way, I think in some ways the community didn't really let go of it for quite some time, or couldn't, and certainly didn't have any resolution for it. But I'm wondering if you could talk for just a minute before you read an excerpt. I know that there was one event that we share in common that happened with our kindergartner that you were particularly kind of maybe really compelled you to put something down about being a parent, and this concept of loss, and grappling with it.
Yeah, and it was tied to Kate, the mother's grief over the girls, and I just couldn't quite get there. And I kept trying, and just the tremendous loss of her girls just waylaid me, and I could not get into the grief in the way that a parent can get into it. But then one day when we were in Chicago, I was working downtown and I get this call from Tommy saying that our 6-year-old daughter had left the school, just left. And we had no idea where she was. The staff didn't know, and there was construction going on at the school and, you know, all sorts of craziness. And, you know, I'm in the cab ride going home, and I'm thinking of all the implications, you know, going past dark alleyways, going, you know, the lake shore, you know, giant waves hitting those, and you know, the various points, you know, with the train stops and all that stuff just made me, you know, it put me in that place of pitching forward. And, you know, they had helicopters going over our, you know, our cul-de-sacs, or, you know, our co-ops. And it was, you know, for a whole hour. And I was driving back in a cab, and I told the cab driver, just go over whatever median, you know, you need to go over, run the red lights, whatever you need to do to get back to Evanston. And I just remember, you know, being seized by this horrific moment. And of course, you know, and you're just pitching forward into so many, you know, scenarios, right? You know, you just, the horror of grief, you know, is approaching. And by the time I got close to Evanston, Tommy called me and said, she wandered over to someone's house. And it was just like, what? How did she leave school and not be monitored? You know, she's 6 years old. How does that happen? And anyway, it happened. And they had a child, someone at the house was watching the children, but she just let Ava in, you know.
Yeah,
So,
it was kind of a perfect storm, and just that the new sitter did not have our contact information. I'd called every other house to figure out, and of course it worked out fine for us. And she had just taken herself to a play date and forgotten to like let me know or anybody else. But yeah, it was a terrifying hour where I think for me, and you know, I won't speak for you, but I think for me, we got just a very minor glimpse of what it might be like to have that kind of loss. And it was, you know, a reprieve, of course, for us with, you know, good resolution, but just a glimpse at what it might possibly be like. But I do want to give you time to read an excerpt or two, and then I want to open it up for questions, because I think, you know, again, I think some of the folks, at least on this call, have been in Austin long enough to remember what happened, to remember sort of the fallout and the aftermath. And again, it hits some people so much more personally, and we were, but I do think for our part, having been there as a young person in Austin, a college student at the time, just thinking about, you know, how it really defined, it was like a mark, a line in the sand, and that Austin was a different community before that, and an entirely different community after that, that it became a city where things like that could happen. And which I think was unimaginable before. But yeah, Scott, if you will go ahead and read an excerpt or so, and then we'll open it up for some questions.
So this involves Hollis Finger, who's a Iraq war veteran, and he's had a head injury in Iraq, and so after the demolition of the ice cream shop, which I changed the ice cream shop, um, he sees the girls near the Zilker Hillside Theater. And so I'll read this section. The week after the ice cream shop demolition, Hollis sees the girls in the bare trees near the Zilker Hillside Theater, drinking peach wine coolers and watching a shabby production of a Midsummer Night's Dream. At first, Hollis thinks that it's a trick of the moon tower's glow, that it's shadowy twisting oaks. But then he notices the wind has changed directions and his cedar allergies are coming on, his left ear aches, all of which are signs. Covered in ash from the demolition, the girls look somehow leaner, taller than they've been in life. Gone is the baby fat, thick ankles. They hoot from the trees at the puck who forgets his lines and whose blocking is so bad that he seems to drift around the stage like an abandoned boat. Elizabeth, a stage manager in high school, takes blocking notes, mimics their stepfather East Texas drawl. That there is a piss poor performance. From a nearby branch, her sister Zadie shakes her head ruefully and speaks out of the side of her mouth. A sorry ass sight. The girls seem to sense Hollis watching them because they crumble and smoke in the moon tower twilight. Meredith, her brown skin and dark hair washed out with ash, takes a long swallow from a wine cooler and looks up thoughtfully at the stage. I like that fellow with the horse's head, she says. They all laugh because that's Meredith, a horsey girl. Meredith kicked by a horse when she was 10. Meredith with a curving scar like a bend in the river on her abdomen from the surgery, a kidney lost. Zadie, in a know-it-all way that seems to embarrass the others, says, his name's Bottom and he's got an ass's head. Hello. What if we were our names, Elizabeth says. What do you think, Mayor? Zadie whinnies. Someone is watching us, Elizabeth says. Meredith holds up an ash-smudged finger like a TV prosecutor. Our memories of what we might have been given a little more time. Puck says from the stage that it's just the mushrooms talking. Actors, Elizabeth says, smirking. Still, he is kind of cute, Zadie says, feeling wistful. There's a pressure in Hollis's ear. The wind whistles through the bare limbs, stirs the ash. The moon tower glow weighs down the sky until they're on the bottom of a vast, shallow sea. A sea that's built its monuments of coral and shell and limestone from the depth of its own body. Some small and terrible suffering that it's kept hidden from itself. Oh, it's our car guy, Meredith says in a way that makes pride and shame flicker through Hollis like heat lightning. Elizabeth lifts her head and closes her eyes like a medium. Ah, I see now. He's building a monument, a shrine, Zadie corrects, holds up an ashy index finger. A likeness, Meredith says with a kind of finality. Hollis can smell their Dolce and Gabbana perfume in the trees now, which they have applied liberally to cover the waffle cone smell, and feels the ache of leaving and coming home, which strikes the girls as funny since he lives in his car, and remembers suddenly the milky smell of his mother's dress right after she'd had her last child. who was not really his brother, how it thrilled and repulsed him. He wants to tell them he can't help, even though they are on the floor of a shallow sea and greatly changed. He can't even tell them what has happened to them or who has done it. You have carved us on the palm of your hand, they say, one voice handing off to the next like a relay race. And he denies them 3 times until they finally spit him out on the rocky crags of the park, his ears 2 seashells still murmuring of the sea.
And so if, just to clarify for folks too, I mean, this is really kind of in your telling, I mean, it's really more the magical realism of your novelistic style, right? So Hollis is this vehicle, this medium of sorts between the current world, right? And then the world where the girls no longer exist anymore, except in the aftermath and their presence, their lingering presence in Zilker Park. And so he imagines them, or he sees them in a way that they continue to age and that they continue to be immature and you know, tease each other and tease him, because he is this sort of conduit between the real world, where they have now been passed for several years, and the yogurt shop or the ice cream shop now demolished, and their sort of ongoing existence in this ethereal world, right? And so Hollis is this medium of sorts, but an unreliable one, right? Because he is this person damaged by war and you know, impaired in certain ways. But it both, you know, hampers him, but also gives him access to some other existence that the girls still have in some way.
And, you know, he was present on the night they were killed, though he doesn't remember it that way. So he had all sorts of, you know, he can't make sense of time, and time is lost to him. So, you know, he can't put together, you know, the detectives want, you know, the hideous man is who they keep talking about, and you know, he was in a long trench coat, but Hollis can't nail it down, and so they question him repeatedly, and kind of like, you know, ultimately the police never question this elderly couple who left the yogurt shop that night, and saw 2 people sitting at a table in there, you know, and that came, you know, after I'd created Hollis and everything. But, you know, why wouldn't you question the last people who had been in there, you know, in the yogurt shop? But it didn't happen. So, and
so I do want to make sure that we have time for Q&A. And so if we'll just pause here, and I'm going to open it up. So if you would like to use the raise hand function, or put a question in the chat, or we've got some folks I can scroll through our participant list and just see if you'd like to wave and let me know. I think I see a question from Barbara. If you want to unmute and jump on in.
Can you hear me?
yeah.
Okay. When you were reading it, I got to the point where I said, how can you ever finish the book? How can you resolve where you know, I just see them one moment in time, but how can you ever resolve and come to an ending? And I won't ask you the ending, but I'm curious.
Well, Hollis builds a kind of homage to the girls in Zilker Park, and he builds these giant mounds out of, you know, he takes a backhoe and builds these giant mounds, and each individual kind of has their own way of resolving things. The girls, you know, just they kind of exist in the ether a little bit, and they're very close to their mom, and that's, you know, where see how small a thing that keeps us apart is the, you know, the light in the washer room, and it's about the collective kind of connection that they have, and they're almost there, and the mother begins to, you know, sense we in her dreams that the girls are present with, you know, and she has to resolve in the end to let them go, and it's you know, the girls resolve to let the world go, and that's really the way it works. It's not about justice or, you know, incrimination or, you know, any of those things. It's about a kind of peace that you make on the inside, and that's really what happens. And you know, Hollis deals with this, but he makes an homage to the girls in Zilker Park and just builds these giant mounds in reverence of them. Yeah.
Okay, I'll scan Rick, if you want to go ahead and jump in with a question or a comment.
Yeah, I was interested in your comment about why didn't they interview the last people who were there? After the fire, were the records destroyed? Could they tell who the last person was, or was there any surveillance?
Well, Jordan did, I want to say in 2012, she did a story in the Austin Chronicle about a couple that were the last to leave the restaurant or last to read the yoga shop. And they saw two guys in there that were sitting, and they, you know, the girls let them out, and they were creeped out by it. And so, you know, but the police never interviewed them. And it's just, you know.
And I
Yeah.
believe those, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe those people came forward and said, we were
Yeah.
there that evening. It was close to closing time. There were these two men still there, and, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And it's just strange that they never interviewed them, you know. It's just lost records and DNA samples, and, you know, it just, and when they, you know, they approached, Jordan approached the Austin Police Department, and they had a bunch of new people, you know, already on, and they asked, do you think these boys committed the murder? And they all raised their hands. There's just no proof at all, you know. So
Probably, and again, my 2 cents worth, I suspect probably a degree of confirmation bias as well. So once you believe that you've caught the right person or the right people, you're not going to really consider evidence.
It transfers to the new people, and yeah, it's just impossible. But
yeah. I'm going to scan here. If you are not, I can't see your hands. You may want to go ahead and unmute yourself.
Chloe has her hand up.
Oh, go ahead. Sure. Go ahead.
Well, Scott, this is trip down memory lane. I didn't realize it was 30 years ago.
yeah.
I was working in a large agency, but with a very small, intimate unit. And one of our staff people, one of my co-workers, his daughter was a friend of one of the girls. And his grief became our grief in that small unit. And so I'm experiencing things that I have long forgotten, and it's kind of, I would say it's painful. But I guess my question is, as you've written a novel based on the real thing, but it's a novel nonetheless. What reaction, if any, have you had from any of the families?
Well, I wrote the families before the book came out, and I didn't get any reply, and I didn't expect to, really, because it's taking material from the experience, but I was looking for a different way to solve it. Catharsis is a different way to, it'll never be solved, right?
Probably not.
Yeah.
Unless somebody comes forward and
Yeah.
says,
I'm the one.
I'm the one, I'm about to die, I need to confess. Yeah.
Right. And but you're left with grief and ongoing grief, as many of the parents experienced, and no resolution to that. And so I tried to find a resolution that is more personal and less launching out, where plot influences plot and all that stuff. I went for the cathartic moment, and Hollis Finger embodying the girls in Silker Park, and that's a way to solve it. And Kate and the girls kind of come to some understanding as well. That's the idea of it. And yeah.
How long did it take? I'm sorry to keep, I'm not through with my questions. How long did you live with this? How long did your research and then the writing of it, how long in all?
Well, I looked back in my journals, and I started working on this in 2008, in early 2008, and I was very interested in the grief that these people had gone through and what it amounted to. Ultimately, and so it took me, I guess, till 2014 to complete it. And I had a lot of good commentary from Tommy, but also from Ben Fountain. He's a mentor of mine, and he gave me a lot of really great commentary on the manuscript, and that really helped.
Yeah, and for those of you who aren't familiar, Ben Fountain is I guess he's kind of local-ish. He travels a little bit, but he's the author of Conversations with Che Guevara and Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk. Really, really interesting, thoughtful writer. So yeah, but yeah, and I think he really did give you some good commentary. So Pam, if you have other questions, please feel free. If other folks
I have, if there's anything that can be humorous to add to this, my mother was visiting from a small island that she lived in at that time off the UK. And this happened while she was here.
Oh, wow.
And she'd never been happy about my, living in Texas. And of course, this was on top of her son-in-law being at UT when there was the tower shooting. And so, and of course, it was constantly on the TV. You all remember that.
Yeah.
That were here.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking, oh my gosh, what is this woman thinking about where I live? And And we never really talked about it. It was best just not to, given family dynamics, it was best just not to. But oh my. And of course I was dealing with the trauma at work and then coming home.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I was working half days at that time while she was here.
Yeah, it's just amazing that 1,000 people turned out for the funeral, you know. It was just devastating to the city at the time.
Yeah.
And you knew someone who was deeply affected.
Yes,
Yeah.
I did. And
Yeah.
And you know, I don't know how it's affected his daughter as she has matured, because I'm not in contact with him anymore. But yeah, you have to wonder about that.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. We were just talking this morning about it. And again, you know, how Austin was just, I think anybody living here during that time, it was just a very different place before and after. And I think for those of you on this call who remember the tower shooting, you know, that Austin, that was another thing that was very much, there was a kind of Austin that was before that and a kind of Austin after that, where, you know, it changes, I think, the makeup and sort of the constitution of the city to be a place where something that horrific happens. And it, you know, everybody is, you know, certainly there are people that are most directly affected by it. But again, anybody that saw and lived here at the time, you know, just knew it as a different place after that. It became a different place to be.
That's true. And the acceleration of Austin changed by 1998. It just, you know, growing.
I do want to scan really, I know we're coming up close to an hour, but I want to scan here and see if there are any other questions or comments that folks want to jump in with. Gail, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I may have missed this, and if I did, I apologize, but have they totally closed the case, or is it still somewhat open?
Yeah, it's still somewhat open, but you know, where are you gonna find information at this point? You know, it's like the DNA, you know, they were apparently the FBI had in effect the DNA, but wouldn't give it to the Austin police. So there was this convoluted, you know, back and forth. And, but, you know, odds are the people committed it are long gone, you know, they're, you know, probably passed away, you know, years ago. I mean, if you live in that circle and you're doing those things, you're not going to survive probably very long. And, you know, and you know, there was serial killers they tried to implement at the time. Yeah, I can't remember who was the guy who was, he took someone from a
Car wash. It was
Yeah,
Kenneth Allen McDuff.
Yeah, McDuff. And they tried to, you know, link that, but it just went nowhere. And, you know, those things, you know, 30 years later, it's just kind of impossible, I think, to make any DNA connection. And, you know, I don't think anyone will confess to it, you know. It's just too far gone in the past. And anyway, I just think that's, you know, we got to make our own peace with it. And that's what I tried to do in See How Small was, you know, come up with a way to inside the individual you know, how you can make peace with this. But, and it's all about grief and, you know, kind of counseling, you know, yourself. And that's ultimately what it's about.
So it's really probably pretty hard for those families to ever put closure on this.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
In fact, there was a true crime book that that came out the year after mine did, and it's called "Who Killed These Girls?" And I know the writer, and we conversed, you know, while we were writing these, and it is, you know, she got to know the parents really well, and you know, I didn't really want to get to know the parents really well, though I wanted to give them a heads up that this was coming out, and you know, that it might stir up some things for them. And I didn't intend to, you know, because it's a recreation of, you know, so many things, but the idea was, you know, to get into the grief and then, you know, connect to that and then have a catharsis of some kind. So that was the idea.
Yeah. Rick, I see your hand up. We may
You
wrap up
mentioned-
after
you
that, but
mentioned
go
the
ahead.
Earlier events, the earlier murders, you know, in the late 1800s, we had our own Jack the Ripper. And
Yeah.
those ladies of the evening are buried at Oakwood Cemetery. And on Halloween weekend, the Save Our Cemeteries group does tours of Oakwood Cemetery. And they have women in period costumes at those graves talking about those ladies' lives. You know, the murders quit and they never found who did it. And that's about the time that Jack the Ripper in London started. So somebody tried to tie those together, but I don't think they've ever proved that. So, but it's interesting. Wonder how that went over in those days in Austin.
Yeah. Who's the writer of that book?
I've got a copy of it here. I don't know.
Yeah. And he used to write for Texas Monthly, and
Probably.
yeah, I read that book too, partly because they make the connection to Jack the Ripper later in London, and it was kind of similar. Yeah.
Yeah, here it is. It's Richard Zalotti. Here,
Oh,
I'll show you.
okay.
I'll show you the.
Austin Murder and Mayhem. Yeah.
And there's the author's name.
Okay, Richard Zalotti. Okay. Yeah, they definitely make that connection, and I can't remember the second guy who wrote a lengthy thing was I think he wrote for Texas Monthly, and he makes the connection even firmer with the
Really?
yeah.
Huh.
I'm blanking on his name, but I'll shoot you. It's a, you know, it's a pretty good book. It makes the connections, and he digs up a lot of material on that. But mine was about, yeah, just coming to some kind of catharsis. So, in which we'll never get, you know, ultimately.
All right, well, I'm going to scan real quickly, but I think that may wrap our questions up. Thank you guys so much for giving us some of your time this afternoon. And Scott, thank you. Really good of you to do this for us. And yeah, I really appreciate that we had a chance to talk about this. Yeah, and partly that, you know, the timing of it reminds us about what's gone on in Austin, but also that, you know, we can find ways individually, I think, to, you know, to process things, whether it's on an individual or community level. And I think this is kind of an illustration of how that can happen. I'm going to let things go here, but Scott, again, thank you so much for everything today. Really appreciate it. I'll buy you dinner if you want for giving us your time. Anyway,
Okay.
it's a deal. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I do remind you, please check the calendar section of our website for more upcoming programs. Again, capitalcityvillage.org. And Scott's book, if you are interested, again, that is See How Small by Scott Blackwood and others. Again, thank you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Bye, everyone.